David slammed his hand on the table so hard the silverware rattled. His voice cut through the air like a whip. "This land is ours now, old man. You don't have a say anymore." For a moment, even the ceiling fan above us seemed to pause. My daughter Linda froze with her fork halfway to her mouth. My granddaughter Emily's wide eyes darted from her father to me, confusion written all over her young face. The roast chicken on the platter steamed quietly as if it too was holding its breath. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. I didn't answer. I only leaned back in my chair, let a slow smile creep across my lips, and reached for the bowl of green beans. I placed a few on my plate, chewed deliberately, and kept my eyes on David. That silence was heavier than any words I could have spoken. Patrick, my neighbor, had been invited over for supper that night. He sat at the end of the table, his weathered lawyer's face calm, but his eyes sharp. He looked at David, then at me, and gave the faintest shake of his head. The house smelled of butter and garlic, but under it ran a sour current. Pride, arrogance, and something darker. Linda tried to soften the moment. She cleared her throat. "David, maybe we should just—" But David waved her off with the back of his hand, his jaw set, his chest puffed up. He was a man on a stage performing for everyone in the room, most of all himself. "No, Linda, he needs to hear it. He's old, tired. It's time he let go of this property. We're the future, not him." I heard the words, but more than that, I saw Emily's lip tremble. She clutched her napkin as though the fabric could anchor her in that storm. I forced myself to stay steady. After 72 years, I had learned when to raise my voice and when to keep it buried deep in my chest. Tonight was not the time for fireworks. Tonight was for watching, listening, remembering every word. David Patrick finally spoke, his tone measured. "This is not the place." But David only laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "You don't get it, Patrick. This isn't about place. It's about control. And we've taken it." He looked back at me, his eyes burning with the thrill of conquest. I met his gaze, chewing my beans slowly, and let the silence hang. Linda dropped her eyes to her plate, stabbing at a piece of chicken she didn't eat. I knew that look. It was the same look her mother once wore when she was cornered between duty and fear. The room was quiet, except for the ticking of the old wall clock. Each second stretched, and with it, the weight on Linda's shoulders seemed to press her down further. I thought of the years that house and land had carried me through layoffs at the factory, through winters when we burned wood scraps to keep warm, through Mary's illness. When I sat up nights counting pennies for her medicine. Every corner of that land held my sweat, my calluses, my prayers, and here was David talking as though it were a prize he had won. But I kept smiling. A man can lose his temper and lose the war all at once. Emily's small voice broke the silence. "Grandpa, is Daddy right?" Her words were a dagger. Linda flinched. David smirked. And me, I reached over, patted Emily's hand, and said nothing. Some truths a child should not have to swallow at 12 years old. Patrick reached for his water glass, his knuckles white. He didn't speak, but I knew he wanted to. His years as a lawyer had taught him restraint, but his eyes spoke volumes. Finally, David leaned back, satisfied with the echo of his own voice filling the room. "That's it, then. We're clear. This land, this house, it's ours now. You can sit there and chew your beans all night, George, but the world's already moved on without you." He raised his glass of wine in a mock toast. Linda's hand trembled as she lifted hers, but she couldn't meet my eyes. Patrick didn't move. Emily didn't either. I took my fork, speared another bite of green beans, and chewed with slow precision. The sound of my chewing seemed louder than David's declaration, and as I swallowed, I let the smallest chuckle slip from my throat. David frowned. "What's so funny, old man?" "Nothing at all." I said, my voice low, calm, steady. "Nothing at all." And with that, I set my fork down and reached for the breadbasket. The table remained frozen in a mix of anger, shame, and unease. Linda blinked rapidly, fighting tears. She didn't want anyone to see. Emily looked to her mother, then back to me, still searching for answers. Patrick cleared his throat, but whatever words he wanted to say, he swallowed them back. I leaned back in my chair, folded my hands in my lap, and looked at David. He thought he had won something tonight, but I had lived long enough to know that some victories rot from the inside out. I could feel the air settle heavier on my shoulders, like the summer humidity that clings to you long after the sun sets. But I kept my posture straight, my face calm. You learn as you grow older that silence can speak louder than thunder. David, though, wasn't satisfied. Men like him rarely are. He pushed his chair back just a little, leaned forward on his elbows, and gave me that look half smug, half daring me to rise to his challenge. You should be grateful, he said. We'll take care of the place better than you ever could at your age. We'll build something people will actually admire. A house that'll make folks talk. I lifted my glass of water, let the rim touch my lips, and drank slow. My eyes never left his. I wanted him to see that I wasn't rattled no matter how hard he tried to shake me. Linda shifted uncomfortably. David, please. Her voice was barely more than a whisper. She didn't finish the sentence. I knew why she was caught in the same trap so many children find themselves in, pulled between loyalty to their spouse and loyalty to the one who raised them. Emily fiddled with her fork, her small brow furrowed. She didn't understand all the words, but she understood enough to know her family was splitting at the seams right there at the dinner table. Patrick finally cleared his throat. His voice was even, but it carried a weight only a man of his years could deliver. George has looked after this land longer than some of us have been alive, David. You might want to remember that. David chuckled low and dismissive. The past doesn't pay bills, Patrick. This isn't about memory or sentiment. This is about moving forward. And George, he jabbed a finger at me, doesn't have the strength or the means anymore. It's time he let go. I set my glass down carefully. My hands were steady, but inside a storm was building. Not the kind that lashes out, but the kind that brews dark and patient, waiting for its time. I thought of Mary, my late wife, and the nights we sat on this very porch years ago, talking about keeping the land in the family, making sure it always had a Miller's name on it. I thought of the promise I whispered over her grave. David couldn't touch that memory. He couldn't soil it no matter how loud he shouted tonight. Linda's chair scraped against the floor as she rose quickly. Emily, sweetheart, why don't you go wash up? Her voice trembled. Emily looked at me hesitant. I gave her a small nod and she slipped off her chair, her footsteps soft against the hardwood floor. Once she was gone, Linda turned back, her face pale, her eyes glassy. Please, can we not do this right now? But David wasn't ready to stop. This is exactly the time, Linda. If we don't lay it out plain, he'll keep pretending he has some say in what happens next. I leaned forward, finally resting my hands flat on the table. The wood was cool beneath my palms. My smile stayed fixed, but my voice dropped lower, calmer still. David, I said you think you've already won, but you don't even know what game you're playing. For the first time that evening, his smirk faltered. It was only a flicker, his eyes narrowed. His jaw clenched, but I saw it. Patrick saw it too. The silence that followed was thick, like a heavy quilt laid over the room. Linda looked from me to David, her breath caught in her chest. I picked up my fork again, speared another bean and chewed. The sound was quiet, but it echoed in that moment. You'll see, I added softly, almost as if I were speaking only to myself. Linda sank back into her chair, tears threatening to spill. David leaned away, restless now, drumming his fingers on the wood. Patrick's eyes lingered on me, curious, almost approving. The dinner carried on in fragments. Small talk forced, plates moved around without appetite, the clock ticking louder than voices. But the heart of the night had already been written. A line had been drawn. When I finally rose from the table, I placed my napkin neatly beside my plate, pushed the chair back with care, and looked once more at David. I gave him the kind of smile a man gives when he knows something the other doesn't, and as I walked out onto the porch, the summer air cool against my skin, I knew deep down that this was only the beginning. After dinner, the house grew too quiet. The kind of quiet that settles heavy on the walls, thicker than any storm outside. Linda busied herself in the kitchen stacking plates and running water, but I could see her hands tremble each time she lifted a glass. I sat on the porch, rocking gently in the old wooden chair Mary and I bought decades ago. The boards creaked under me, and I let the sound steady my thoughts. Through the screen door, I could hear the clink of dishes and Linda's soft breathing, uneven, as though she was holding back something she couldn't say. A few minutes passed before she came out. She stood there, arms crossed, her face half in shadow. For a moment she looked like a little girl again, caught sneaking out after curfew. "Daddy," she whispered, almost too soft for me to hear. I didn't move. I just kept rocking, watching the fireflies blink across the yard. Finally, I said, "Go on, Linda." Her voice cracked. "I'm sorry. I should have said something at the table. I should have told David to stop." I turned my head slowly, let my eyes rest on her. She wouldn't meet them. She stared down at the porch boards, her toes curling in her sandals. "Sorry," I said, "is a heavy word, Linda. He's your husband. I know that." She nodded quickly, too quickly. "But you're my father." Her shoulders shook, and for a second I thought she might cry, but she swallowed it back the way she always has. Linda was born with that same stubborn pride her mother carried. I wanted to reach out to tell her I forgave her, but something inside me stopped short. Forgiveness was too easy too soon. Words at the table had cut deep, and wounds like that don't close in one night. "You don't have to choose tonight," I told her, "but the time will come when you will, and when it does, don't look away." She nodded again, then hurried back inside. The door shut softly, but it sounded final somehow. I leaned back, let the rocking chair move with the rhythm of my breathing. My chest felt tight, not from anger alone, but from fear. Fear of becoming invisible. Fear of being shoved aside like an old newspaper left to yellow in the sun. The land was all I had left that tied me to Mary, to my youth, to the man I used to be. If I lost that, I wondered what would be left of me. The next evening, I stopped by the diner downtown, the same one I've been going to since my factory days, with the checkered curtains and the smell of burnt coffee that never really leaves. I ordered my usual meatloaf and mashed potatoes and listened. At the booth behind me, a couple of David's buddies were laughing loud enough for the whole place to hear. "He says he's putting up a new place by the highway," one of them said. "Says the old man finally gave in." "About time, huh?" The other laughed a harsh sound. "Guess the geezer figured he can't stop progress." I set down my fork, my stomach tightening. They were talking about me as if I'd already surrendered, as if the land was already gone. I finished my meal in silence, paid my bill, and walked out into the cool night air. The neon sign buzzed overhead, and for a long moment I just stood there, staring at my reflection in the diner's window. My hair thinner, my shoulders stooped, my eyes tired. Was this what they all saw now? A man past his usefulness? I clenched my fists, the bones in my hands aching. No, I wasn't finished yet. Later that week, Patrick dropped by. He leaned on the fence between our yards, a mug of coffee in his hand. Heard some things he said quietly. I didn't ask how. Patrick had been a lawyer too long not to know what was going on in town before anyone else did. They're saying David's already drawing up plans, bragging all over town like it's done. I nodded slowly. I heard. Patrick sipped his coffee, watching me. "You going to let him?" I looked back at him, let the silence stretch. Then I said, "A man who brags that loud usually doesn't see the ground shifting under his feet." Patrick's lips twitched almost a smile. "Fair enough." That night I couldn't sleep. The old ceiling fan spun lazily above me, pushing around warm air that never cooled. I lay there staring at the cracks in the plaster, listening to the sound of crickets outside. David's words replayed in my head over and over. Old man, no say. It was as if he'd carved them into the walls themselves. I turned to the nightstand where Mary's picture sat in its frame. Her smile, frozen in time, softened something in me. I whispered, "They think I'm finished, Mary. But I'm not. Not yet." The next day, I drove into town to pick up a prescription. At the pharmacy, I overheard two men by the soda fountain. "David Carter's got a big project coming," one said. "New house out by Miller's Field. Says it'll be worth a fortune once it's up." The other laughed. "Guess the old man finally gave in. Can't stop the future, right?" I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I said nothing. I paid for my pills, tipped my cap to the clerk, and walked out. On the sidewalk, I stopped to catch my breath. It wasn't just anger, it was humiliation. They were speaking of me as if I weren't even part of the story anymore. That afternoon, Patrick came by again. We sat on the porch, the cicadas buzzing like a chorus in the trees. He sipped his coffee slow, then said, "I saw David at the bar last night. He was boasting to anyone who'd listen. Said you'd roll over easy." I chuckled bitterly. That's what he wants to believe. Patrick leaned forward. "I've known you a long time, George. You don't roll over, not without a fight." I didn't answer right away. I watched Emily chasing fireflies in the yard, her laughter ringing pure and bright. Linda stood by the door, arms folded, her face shadowed with worry. She avoided my eyes, but I could feel the weight of her guilt pressing between us. When the sun dipped low, I walked Patrick out to his truck. Before he climbed in, he set a hand on my shoulder. "You've got more options than you think. Don't let him box you in." I nodded, grateful for his words, even if I didn't yet know how to act on them. Later that week, word spread further. Folks at church murmured after Sunday service. Some offered polite sympathy, others just shook their heads. I could feel their eyes on me as I walked past, the whispers trailing behind like smoke. Poor George. Guess he's losing the place. Shame after all those years. I kept my head high, but inside I burned. To them, I was already a man defeated. Back home that evening, Linda came out to the porch again. She wrung her hands, her eyes red. "Daddy, I don't know how to fix this." I looked at her, my voice steady. "You don't have to fix it, Linda. Just don't add to it." Tears slipped down her cheeks. She turned away before Emily could see. I let her go, saying nothing more. Some burdens a parent carries alone. As darkness fell, I sat on that porch until the fireflies disappeared and the crickets grew louder. I thought of the land, every fence post I'd set, every furrow I'd plowed, every night Mary and I had sat under those same stars, dreaming of a future rooted right here. David thought he was building something new, but he didn't see the cracks forming beneath his own feet. I leaned back in my chair, folded my arms, and let a small smile creep across my face. The game wasn't over. In truth, it hadn't even started. Sunday mornings have always had a rhythm in this town. The church bells rang just after sunrise, their sound rolling over the rooftops like a call no one could ignore. I'd been walking through those doors for more than 50 years, but that morning my legs felt heavier than usual. I put on my best jacket, the navy one Mary had insisted I keep pressed, even when we had little money for such things. As I straightened my tie in the mirror, I told myself, "Hold your head high." But when I stepped into the sanctuary, I could feel eyes following me. The whispers started small. Just the scrape of a pew, a hush of breath, but soon it grew like a draft sneaking through the old stained glass windows. "They say David's taking the land, already making plans for a new house." Poor George. Shame to see it end this way. I walked down the aisle, slowly nodding at folks I'd known half my life, but their smiles were thin, strained, and full of pity. That cut deeper than open ridicule. I sat in my usual pew, third from the front, and bowed my head. The pastor's voice rose from the pulpit, but I barely heard him. My mind wandered, snagging on every fragment of gossip still hanging in the air. My land, my legacy, passed around like it was already lost, like I was already gone. After service, I stepped outside into the bright morning sun. Children darted around the steps, chasing one another, their laughter shrill against the low hum of adult voices. Such a shame after all his years working that place. He doesn't stand a chance against David. Young men always get their way these days. I kept walking, my shoes crunching on the gravel, each step louder than the voices, louder than the pity. Back home, Emily was waiting with Linda on the porch. Emily ran to me, her hair bouncing in the light. She wrapped her small arms around my waist and looked up, her eyes wide with concern. "Grandpa," she asked, "why did you look so sad at church?" The question pierced through me sharper than any rumor. I glanced at Linda, but she turned away quickly, her lips pressed tight, her hands gripping the railing until her knuckles turned white. I knelt down, brushing a strand of hair from Emily's forehead. "Sometimes, sweetheart, grown-ups hear things that hurt. But it doesn't mean we give up." Emily nodded slowly, though I knew she didn't fully understand. She hugged me again before darting off into the yard. Linda stayed behind, staring down at the wooden boards. She whispered so soft I almost missed it. "I should have defended you." I didn't answer. Silence weighed on me, heavier than words. That evening, Patrick came by. He leaned against the fence, hands tucked into the pockets of his flannel shirt. "You know," he said, "sometimes pride can be a man's worst enemy." I chuckled without humor. "And sometimes it's all he has left." Patrick studied me for a moment, his eyes narrowing. "George, don't let pride stop you. Sometimes silence is the loudest protest. Folks think you've given in, but I know you better than that." I didn't reply right away. I looked out over the fields, the tall grass swaying in the summer breeze. The land seemed alive, as if it was listening too. Finally, I said, maybe silence is the only way to let them reveal themselves. Patrick gave a slow nod. Just don't wait too long. Time has a way of hardening lies into truth. He left me with that thought, his truck rumbling down the road, leaving a trail of dust behind. I stayed on the porch until the crickets sang the weight of the day pressing heavy on my chest. That night the house was quiet again, but it wasn't the comforting kind of quiet. It was the silence that presses down, the kind that makes your own heartbeat sound too loud in your ears. I sat at the kitchen table, the light above me buzzing faintly, staring at Mary's old recipe box. She used to write little notes to herself on scraps of paper, grocery lists, prayer reminders, small verses she wanted to remember. I flipped through them, my fingers brushing over her handwriting. One card read, "Simply hold steady. Truth will show." I closed my eyes and let those words sink in. In the days that followed, the silence took on a life of its own. At the grocery store, I felt the stares again, quiet voices behind me. At the gas station, the clerk hesitated before asking about the land, his voice full of awkward sympathy. Each time I said nothing. I just gave a polite nod, paid, and went on my way. People thought my silence meant surrender. They mistook it for weakness. But deep inside, I knew better. One evening, as the sun was setting, Linda came to the porch again. She looked worn, her eyes ringed with shadows. "Daddy," she began, her voice tight. "David's been talking more. He says it's only a matter of weeks before the house goes up. He's telling everyone you signed off already." I raised an eyebrow but stayed calm. "And do you believe him?" Linda hesitated. Her lips parted, but no sound came. "That silence told me everything I needed to know. I don't want to," she whispered finally. "But it's hard not to when he speaks with so much certainty." I leaned forward, resting my hands on my knees. "Linda, certainty doesn't make a thing true. You know me. You know I wouldn't give up what your mother and I built with our own hands, not without a fight." Tears welled in her eyes. She nodded quickly as if afraid to let herself believe it. When she turned to go back inside, Emily was at the doorway holding her stuffed bear. She'd been listening. "Grandpa," she said softly, "are you fighting?" I walked over and laid a hand on her shoulder. "I'm standing, Emily. Sometimes standing is the strongest fight of all." Her little brow furrowed in thought, but she nodded, clutching her bear tighter. Later that week, Patrick and I met again by the fence. The air was cooler, the first hint of autumn creeping in. He looked me over, then said, "You've been awful quiet. Sometimes that's the only way to hear what others are really saying," I replied. He smiled faintly. "Well, the town thinks you've rolled over. David's enjoying that story a little too much. He doesn't realize silence isn't the same as surrender." I looked out over the field again. The grass swayed gently in the breeze, golden in the fading light. I could almost hear Mary's voice in the wind, "Hold steady." "I'm letting him dig his own hole," I said finally. "When the ground gives way, no one will blame me. They'll know the truth." Patrick gave a slow nod. "Just remember, George, silence can be powerful, but only if you know when to break it." That night, I sat back on the porch long after the stars came out. The crickets sang, the air smelled of cut grass, and for the first time in weeks I felt a flicker of peace. Because deep down I knew silence wasn't the end of my story. It was only the beginning of theirs. It was a few evenings after that Sunday when the first cracks in David's pride began to show. I was sitting on the porch, rocking slow in the twilight, when I heard raised voices from across the field. Their windows were open and sound carried easy in the still air. "Linda, you don't understand." David's tone was sharp, frantic. "This is bigger than us. If we don't lock this down now, we're finished." Linda tried to soothe him, but her words were drowned by his. I leaned back in my chair, listening. My chest tightened. I didn't want to hear, but I couldn't turn away either. The next day, word reached me through the grapevine. David had been tangled in a deal real estate, they said, that went sour. He'd borrowed heavy, expecting a quick turnaround. But the market shifted, and now the sharks were circling. That evening, I saw it for myself. A black pickup truck pulled into David's driveway. A man stepped out, heavy-set, his boots crunching against the gravel. He walked with the confidence of someone who collected debts for a living. I watched from my porch as David met him outside. Their conversation was hushed, but the man's posture spoke volumes. At one point, he jabbed a finger into David's chest. David's face turned pale, his bravado shrinking into something smaller, tighter. The man finally left his tires spitting dust as he roared down the road. David stood frozen in his yard for a long while before heading back inside. Later that night, Linda came to me. Her face was pale, her eyes ringed with worry. "Daddy," she whispered, glancing back toward her house. "You don't know what he's gotten us into. He owes money. A lot of it." I stayed quiet, letting her spill the rest. "He says if you just sign the land over, everything will be fine. He can pay them back, build the house, prove himself. But if you don't—" Her voice cracked. "They're not the kind of men who wait politely." I reached for her hand. "Linda, debt doesn't disappear just because you changed names on a deed. It follows a man till it eats him alive." She sobbed softly, pulling her hand back. "He's desperate. And when he's desperate, he pushes harder. On me. On you." I wanted to tell her to walk away from him, to protect Emily, to come back home. But I knew she wasn't ready for those words. Not yet. Instead, I said, "Desperation doesn't excuse cruelty, and it won't change what I decide." She nodded faintly, then left her shoulders bent under the weight of both love and fear. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. My mind spun with Mary's voice, Patrick's warnings, Linda's tears. The danger wasn't just pride anymore, it was money men who collected it, and the threat they brought to my doorstep. The following morning I drove into town, not to the diner, not to the church, but to the bank. The building stood solid and square on Main Street, the kind of place where decisions outlasted lifetimes. I walked up the steps slowly, each footfall echoing louder than the last. Inside, the cool air smelled faintly of paper and polish. A young teller greeted me with a bright smile, not knowing the storm inside me. "Good morning, Mr. Miller. How can we help you today?" I nodded, steadying my voice. "I need to speak with someone about deeds. About what it takes to make sure a man's land doesn't end up in the wrong hands." The teller led me to a small office in the back, where the air was still and heavy, like the room itself carried secrets. A man in a gray suit looked up from behind a stack of files. His name tag read Anderson. He had the calm, practiced manner of someone used to bad news. "Mr. Miller," he said, standing to shake my hand. "What brings you in today?" I sat down across from him, folding my hands to keep them steady. "I need to understand how to protect my land. My son-in-law thinks he can force my hand. I won't let it happen." Anderson nodded slowly, steepling his fingers. "Do you have a will? A trust?" "Anything set up formally, I've got a will," I said. "But I want to make sure if someone tries to leverage me, tries to trick me into signing something, it won't matter. I want this land to stay out of their reach." He leaned back, eyes thoughtful. "You've got options. You can transfer the property into a trust for the community. Once that's done, no individual, family or otherwise, can touch it. You'll still have rights while you live, but afterward it follows the trust's terms." I let those words settle. A trust for the community. The thought of it stirred something deep inside me, a memory of Mary's voice saying we should leave more than just fences and fields behind. "And once it's done?" I asked. "There's no undoing it." Anderson shook his head. "Not without the trust's approval. It's ironclad." I nodded, the weight both frightening and freeing. When I left the bank, the sun was high, the sidewalks buzzing with life. But my thoughts stayed fixed on the shadows creeping closer from David's side of the fence. That evening, Linda came again, her face drawn, her voice rushed. "David's getting worse, Daddy. A man came by the house yesterday. He slammed the door so hard I thought the hinges would break. He said if David doesn't pay, they'll start taking what's his." Her eyes brimmed with fear. "He wants you to sign this week. He says it's the only way." I looked at her for a long moment. My heart ached seeing her so torn, so trapped between loyalty and fear. "Linda," I said gently, "if I give in, the land won't save him. It'll only feed the fire he lit himself." She shook her head, trembling. "I don't know how to stop him. He won't listen to me. He only talks about proving himself, about showing the town he's not a failure." I reached out, touching her arm. "Sometimes the hardest truth is that you can't carry another person's burden, even when you love them." She broke down, then tears streaming. I held her, wishing I could lift the weight from her shoulders. But deep down I knew this was a storm David had brought on himself, and she was caught in its path. That night I sat on the porch again, the land stretching before me under the moonlight. The rows of trees, the old barn leaning just so, all of it spoke to me as if urging me not to give in. Mary's words echoed once more in my mind. Hold steady, truth will show. And as the night deepened, I knew the course I had to take. I wouldn't just protect my land from David's debts. I would make sure it could never be twisted into his escape hatch. The land had carried me through my life. Now it was time for me to carry it into a future David could never claim. The morning after my talk with Linda, I drove into town before the sun had fully stretched across the fields. The diner sat on the corner of Main and Elm, its neon sign buzzing faintly even in daylight. It had always been my place to think a spot where coffee never ran out, and folks minded their own business if you wanted them to. I slid into a booth by the window, the one where Mary and I used to sit after Sunday service. The Formica tabletop carried the faint scratches of decades, and the smell of bacon grease hung stubborn in the air. I pulled out a notepad I had carried for years, its pages yellowing at the edges, and began to write. My pen scratched slowly at first. Words didn't come easy when they carried the weight of an entire life. I wrote about the land, what it had meant to me, what it had meant to Mary, and what it could mean for the people of Springfield long after I was gone. I wrote about the laughter of children running through the fields, the harvest festivals we used to host the Sunday afternoons spent fixing fences with neighbors who never asked for anything in return. And then I wrote about betrayal, about the sting of seeing my own blood sit silent while her husband plotted to take what was never his. My hand trembled as the words formed. I paused, staring at the letters until they blurred. The waitress, a young woman named Becky, came by with a pot of coffee. She smiled politely, but I could see her eyes flicker toward the tears that threatened to spill. Refill, mister. Miller, I nodded, clearing my throat. Please, and maybe some toast. She poured and I moved on, not prying. That was the kind of grace I needed just then. When the toast came, so did Patrick. He walked in wearing the same worn jacket he'd had since retiring from law, his step slower than it once was, but his eyes sharp as ever. He spotted me, gave a nod, and slid into the booth across from me without asking. "You've been busy," he said, tapping the notebook gently. "Writing down what matters," I replied. He leaned back, signaling Becky for his usual black coffee. "George, I've known you long enough to see where this is headed. You've made up your mind." I nodded, though it felt more like my heart did the talking than my head. I won't let David take the land. Not through lies, not through debts. If it has to go anywhere, it'll go where it can do good. Patrick's expression softened. Community trust. That's the plan, I said. The land can't be twisted into his lifeline if it belongs to something bigger than him. Patrick nodded again, slowly this time. It'll take some paperwork, strong language, but it's doable. I'll help you go through it all. Relief washed over me, though it came with a chill. Once I took this step, there'd be no undoing it. No second chances. We spent the next hour combing through drafts of documents Patrick had brought. He laid them out across the table, words and clauses stacked like bricks in a wall meant to stand forever. He explained each one, making sure I understood. I wasn't about to be the old fool who signed blindly. By the time Becky brought a second round of coffee, my pen was in hand again, this time hovering over the place where my name belonged. I looked at it long and hard. Patrick's voice cut through the quiet. "George, this isn't just paper. This is legacy. Once you sign, the land no longer belongs to you, not in the way you've always known it. You ready for that?" I swallowed the toast, now a lump in my throat. I'm ready, because it won't belong to David either. That's what matters. I pressed the pen down my signature, flowing slow but steady. With every stroke, the years of worry and doubt seemed to ease. For the first time in months, my hand didn't shake. When I slid the paper back across the table, Patrick placed his hand on it firmly, as if sealing the choice with his own. He looked me in the eye. "You did the right thing. But brace yourself, George. David won't sit quiet when he finds out." His warning lingered like a storm cloud at the edge of the sky. Patrick gathered the papers neatly into his briefcase, snapping the latches shut with a sound that felt final, like a door closing behind me. He didn't say much more. He knew the weight of what I had just done needed silence to settle. When he left, I stayed behind at the diner, staring out the window as the town bustled by. Folks were heading into the grocery, kids skipped along the sidewalk with ice cream cones, and a group of older men stood outside the hardware store arguing about baseball. Life carried on ordinary and calm, while my own shifted beneath me. I folded the notebook, slid it back into my coat, and finished the last of my coffee. The bitterness sat strong on my tongue, grounding me. On the drive home, the fields rolled by in their familiar rhythm, corn tassels swaying under the summer wind. I thought of Mary again. She always wanted the land to mean more than just soil and property. She used to talk about building something lasting, something that gave back to the very town that had helped us raise our children. For the first time since she passed, I felt like I was honoring her voice. When I pulled into my driveway, Linda's car was already there. She was sitting on the porch steps, arms wrapped tight around herself. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying. "Daddy," she said as I got out of the truck. "He's pushing harder. He says if you don't sign this week, he'll—" She trailed off, unable to finish. I walked over, lowering myself onto the step beside her. My knees groaned, but I didn't mind. Linda. I already made my decision. Her head snapped toward me. "You did," I nodded. "The land's been taken care of. It's safe. He can shout, he can scheme, but it's out of his reach now." Her lips trembled, torn between relief and dread. "What's he going to do when he finds out?" I sighed, gazing out over the yard where Emily's bike leaned against the fence. "That's a storm we'll have to weather. But better a storm now than ruin later." She leaned against me, shoulders shaking. "I wish I was stronger, Daddy. I wish I could stand up to him the way you do." I put an arm around her, pulling her close. "Strength isn't always loud, sweetheart. Sometimes it's just holding on until the truth shows itself." We sat like that for a long while, the evening air cooling, the cicadas starting their steady song. For a moment, I felt something I hadn't in months' peace. Later that night, as I locked the front door, headlights swept across the yard. A car idled at the curb, engine rumbling. I didn't need to see clearly to know who it was. David. He sat there, his silhouette sharp behind the windshield as if daring me to come out. After a minute, the car rolled away slow, like a wolf circling the edge of a pasture. I stood at the window until the red taillights disappeared into the dark. Patrick's warning echoed in my mind. David would not sit quiet. And neither would I. It didn't take long for David to put on a new mask. By the end of that same week, his swagger had returned, only louder than before. He strutted around town talking big about the house he was about to build as if the land was already in his pocket. I caught wind of it at the grocery store. Two men in line ahead of me whispered, chuckling under their breath. "You hear David Carter's putting up a mansion out on Miller land. Said it'll have a pool movie theater, the works." I felt the words hit me in the chest. They didn't even say my land anymore. It was Carter's project. The humiliation burned, but I kept my face, still paying for my bread and milk like any other old man. That was the role I had to play for now. Later that afternoon, Linda came by, her hands full of rolled-up blueprints. She set them on my kitchen table, looking weary. "Daddy, he's gone and hired an architect," she said, almost apologetically. "He wants me to help pick out the finishes. Granite counters, imported tile. He keeps saying this house will show everyone who he really is." I studied the blueprints, the neat lines forming a mansion larger than anything Springfield had seen. It looked more like a resort than a family home. Linda's eyes flickered with conflict. "He keeps saying this will prove I'm better than your father ever was." I don't even know how to answer him anymore. Her voice cracked on those last words, and I could see the weight pressing down on her. I rested my hand on hers. "Sweetheart, houses don't prove worth, and no pile of stone and wood can outlast the truth." She pulled away, eyes shining with unshed tears. "I know, Daddy, but he won't hear it from me. He's chasing something I don't think even he understands." That evening, as twilight settled over the fields, I heard Emily's small voice drifting through Linda's porch window. She had overheard her parents talking. "But what about Grandpa's house?" she asked, her tone innocent and confused. Linda froze. She looked at her daughter, lips trembling. And for the first time, she broke. She gathered Emily into her arms and sobbed, unable to answer. I stood outside listening, my heart splitting. That little girl saw the truth clearer than the adults who should have known better. Word spread quickly through town. At the diner, at the post office, at the hardware store, everywhere I went, people asked if it was true. Was David Carter really going to build the biggest house Springfield had ever seen? Some admired the ambition, others shook their heads at the arrogance, and through it all, David puffed himself up like a rooster strutting down Main Street with plans under his arm talking about square footage and custom landscaping. He basked in the attention, mistaking whispers for admiration. But underneath his performance, I caught glimpses of the cracks. His smile never quite reached his eyes. His laugh carried a strain like a man running ahead of a debt collector's shadow. I knew then the illusion wouldn't last. The days that followed only deepened the spectacle. Trucks rumbled through town, hauling in samples of stone and lumber, and David made sure everyone saw. He set up meetings in the diner, unrolling blueprints across tables where farmers usually nursed their morning coffee. He spoke loudly with a kind of pride that felt less like confidence and more like desperation. "This is going to put Springfield on the map," I heard him tell a group of men at the counter one morning. "Folks will drive by and say, 'That's the Carter estate.' It'll show what vision looks like." The men nodded politely, though. I noticed the way their eyes exchanged quiet skepticism. This town had seen its share of big talkers. We all knew the difference between steady work and smoke blown into the wind. At home, Linda moved like a shadow. She brought Emily over for supper one night, and I saw the exhaustion in her face. She picked at her food silent until Emily piped up. "Grandpa, Mommy cried again last night," she said innocently. "Daddy kept yelling about money." Linda dropped her fork, covering her mouth with her hand. Tears welled up, but she forced a smile for her daughter. "Eat your green beans, sweetheart." I wanted to reach across the table to tell Linda she didn't have to shoulder this alone, but the time wasn't right. She was still tangled in love and loyalty, still trying to convince herself David would change. A few evenings later, Patrick stopped by. He leaned against my porch rail, his eyes tracking the horizon where David's house supposedly would rise. "He's drawing a lot of attention," Patrick said. "But attention doesn't pay invoices. I've seen men like him before, big promises, hollow foundation." I nodded. "He's building an illusion. Folks are buying it for now, but the cracks are already showing." Patrick tapped the rail. "Just be careful. When illusions shatter, they tend to cut deep." His words stayed with me. The breaking point came during a Saturday potluck at the church hall. The tables were covered with casseroles, pies, and pitchers of sweet tea. People gathered in clusters, catching up on life. But everywhere I turned, David's project filled the air. He walked in late, carrying his rolled plans like a trophy. "Take a look, folks," he said, unrolling the drawings across a table meant for desserts. 3-car garage home theater guest suites, nothing like it in this county. A murmur swept the room. Some leaned in curious. Others pursed their lips. I stood near the back plate, in hand watching it unfold. Emily tugged at Linda's skirt, her voice carrying farther than she meant. "Mommy, if Daddy builds a new house, does Grandpa lose his?" The room went still for a beat. Linda's face drained of color. She scooped Emily up, holding her close, but not before everyone had heard the question. David's jaw tightened. His smile flickered, then returned too wide, too forced. "Kids say the darndest things, don't they?" He laughed, trying to wave it off. But the silence that followed wasn't the sound of admiration. It was the sound of doubt. People were starting to wonder what was real. I slipped out before the evening ended, the cool air on my face a relief. The town had seen the illusion for what it was, a performance held together by bluster and borrowed time. Back on my porch, I sat in the dark, listening to the cicadas hum. The land stretched before me, quiet and steady, in stark contrast to David's noise. And in that stillness, I found a grim kind of comfort. Illusions might dazzle for a while, but truth has a way of waiting patient and unshakable until the lights go out. The Sunday after that potluck, I sat in my usual pew at the back of the church. The hymns rose steady voices, blending in the way small-town congregations do, imperfect, but heartfelt. I bowed my head, but I couldn't focus on the words. My mind wandered back to Emily's innocent question, the silence that had swallowed the room, and the way David's smile had faltered. After the service, as folks milled around the fellowship hall with coffee and cookies, an old friend of mine, Frank Johnson, walked over. He was a retired banker, silver hair, neatly combed, still sharp despite his years. "George," He said quietly, lowering his voice so others wouldn't overhear. I heard David's been pushing papers at the courthouse, trying to rush something through on the property. The cookie in my hand suddenly felt like a stone. What kind of papers? I asked. Frank shook his head. Could be preliminary filings, could be something more. I don't have the details, but I'd keep your eyes open. Men like him, when they start moving fast, it's because they're desperate. I thanked him, keeping my voice calm, though my stomach churned. As I walked out into the warm sunshine, I could almost hear Patrick's warning echo again. When illusions shatter, they cut deep. That evening, I sat on the porch with the paper unopened on my lap, listening to the crickets. The night was quiet, but my thoughts were anything but. Each time a car rolled past on the road, I half expected it to stop, to deliver another blow, another demand. It was close to midnight when Linda came. Her headlights swept across the yard before her car shut off, and she stepped out, shoulders hunched, as if carrying a burden too heavy for her frame. "Daddy," she whispered as she reached the porch. "I can't sleep anymore. He's out of control. He talks about the house like it's already his, like you don't even exist." She sat down beside me, tears glistening under the porch light. "I'm so sorry. I should have stopped him. I should have spoken up." I took her hand in mine, the same hand I'd held when she was a little girl learning to cross the street. "Linda," I said softly, "you don't owe me apologies. You'll see the truth soon enough." She shook her head, pressing her lips together as if to hold back the sobs. "I don't know what's coming, but I feel it, Daddy. And I'm scared." I tightened my grip steady, anchoring her in that moment. "Fear only has power when you let it. Trust me, the storm's coming, but storms always pass. What's left standing afterward? That's what matters." She looked at me, searching for answers in my eyes, but I could tell she wasn't ready to hear everything yet. When she finally rose to leave, she turned back once more. Her figure stood framed in the porch light, fragile and trembling. "Please, Daddy," she said, her voice breaking. "Be careful." I nodded, offering her the strongest smile I could muster. "Go home, Linda. Take care of Emily. Let me carry this." I watched as she walked down the steps, her shadow stretching long across the yard. The car door shut softly, the engine rumbled to life, and then her taillights disappeared into the night. And I sat there long after she'd gone, alone with the crickets and the whisper of the trees, knowing the warnings were piling up. The next morning I took a slow walk into town. My knees ached as they always did, but I let the rhythm of my cane on the sidewalk keep me steady. I stopped by the diner more for the company than the coffee. Folks there knew me as the man who always ordered black coffee and rye toast, and they left me mostly in peace. But that day, whispers floated around the booths. I caught fragments: David's name, the word development, even a laugh about how the old man won't know what hit him. Each word felt like a nail in the coffin of my dignity. Patrick slid into the booth across from me. He didn't need to order. The waitress brought him his usual scrambled eggs in a short stack. He leaned in his lawyer's eyes, sharp as ever. "George," he said, "I've been hearing the same things. David's talking big, saying the paperwork's almost ready, that you'll have no choice but to step aside. He's cocky, but cocky men can still cause damage if you underestimate them." I sipped my coffee, bitter on my tongue. I've underestimated enough in my life. Not anymore. Patrick studied me, then nodded. "Just remember, when a man's drowning in debt, he'll grab at anything, even if it drags others down with him. Be ready." That evening back home, I found myself on the porch again. The old boards creaked under my chair, and the scent of honeysuckle drifted through the warm air. I thought of Linda's face the night before, the fear etched so deeply it made her look years older. My daughter trapped in a cage built by her husband's ambition and pride. As darkness fell, I made a decision. I wouldn't wait for the storm to hit. I would meet it head on. I pulled out the folder Patrick had given me, the papers we had reviewed together. The signatures were clean, the ink fresh. The path was set, though no one else yet knew. Later that night, I heard a car slow outside my house. My heart skipped, but it drove on. Still, I sat in the quiet with the porch light off, letting the shadows keep me company. I thought about my wife Mary and how she would have handled all this. She always said silence could be a shield, but also a sword if wielded right. I whispered her name, a vow hanging unspoken in the air. The next Sunday, Linda avoided my eyes in church. She sat with Emily, clutching her daughter's hand a little too tightly. David strutted in late shaking hands, his laugh echoing too loud. Folks noticed, of course, they always did. But no one said a word to me. After service, Frank touched my arm again. "He's moving faster, George. I don't know how long you've got." I only nodded calm on the surface, though the warning cut deep. Because in my heart I knew the reckoning wasn't far. That night Linda came once more, standing at the bottom of the porch steps, her face pale in the moonlight. She didn't climb up. She didn't need to. I could see the question in her eyes. Was there hope left? I didn't answer with words. I just held her gaze and gave a small, steady nod. She would see soon enough. When she left, I sat alone again, listening to the chorus of crickets. The night air carried both fear and resolve, and in the quiet, I felt that the tide was shifting. The morning had a strange stillness to it, like the air itself was holding its breath. From my porch, I could see the long driveway stretching toward the county road, the gravel scattered from years of wear. The sycamore trees swayed gently in the breeze, but there was something heavy about the sky, as if even the clouds knew what was about to unfold. I had been waiting for this day. Patrick told me it would come quickly, and he was right. David had been too eager, too proud to hide his intentions. A month had passed since the Sunday evening Linda came to me in tears, and in that time the wheels of the bank had turned steadily, quietly. By the time David and Linda arrived, the front yard was already crowded. 2 police cruisers parked along the street, their lights off, but their presence unmistakable. A van from the county bank idled by the curb, and uniformed men carried clipboards and stacks of paperwork. The sight alone was enough to draw neighbors out of their homes. Within minutes, half the block had gathered, men in jeans and baseball caps, women clutching coffee mugs, children peeking from behind their parents' legs. David's shiny SUV rolled up the drive like a conqueror's chariot. The windows were tinted, but I could see his grin even before the engine cut off. He stepped out in a tailored jacket, tossing his keys in the air as though he already owned the place. Linda followed behind her shoulders, slumped, and Emily clutched a teddy bear, her small face confused at the crowd waiting for them. "What the hell is this?" David's voice rang across the yard. He slammed the door of the SUV, looking from the cruisers to the bank officials. "This is our house. What are you all doing here?" One of the officers stepped forward, his face calm, professional. "Sir, we're here on official order. The property has been repossessed by the bank. Effective immediately, it's sealed until further notice." David's jaw dropped. He looked around as if the whole world had gone mad. "Repossessed? What are you talking about? This land belongs to my wife and me. My father-in-law gave it to us." The bank agent, a stout man with a briefcase, shook his head. "Not according to our records. The deed was signed over weeks ago to be transferred directly into the bank's trust. You have no legal standing here." The crowd buzzed with murmurs, whispers carried like sparks through dry grass. Some laughed under their breath. Others simply watched, their eyes fixed on David's reddening face. I pulled up in my old pickup truck, the engine rattling like it always did. The moment I stepped out, silence swept over the yard. David's eyes snapped to me, blazing with fury. "You," he spat, pointing a trembling finger at me. "What did you do, old man?" I adjusted my hat, the sun warm on my neck, and looked him square in the eye. My voice came steady low, the way Mary used to calm me when I was ready to boil over. "I did what you never understood, David. I protected dignity." The words seemed to hang in the air, heavier than the humid morning itself. Linda gasped, her hand covering her mouth. Emily clutched tighter to her bear, her little eyes darting between her parents and me. David lunged forward, his face contorted. "You ruined me. Do you hear me? You ruined everything." But before he could get closer, one of the officers placed a firm hand on his chest. "Step back, sir. This isn't your property anymore." The neighbors whispered louder now, some shaking their heads, others smirking as if they had known all along that David's pride would be his downfall. For years he had strutted through the town, boasting of his future, dismissing those he thought beneath him. And now here he was, laid bare for everyone to see. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The truth was already written on every face around us. David's face turned scarlet, his chest heaving like a bull ready to charge. His voice cracked as he barked at the officer holding him back. "You don't understand. I've been planning this for months. I've already put down deposits. He cut himself off, realizing too late he'd said too much. The crowd's murmurs swelled. They knew a desperate man when they saw one. Linda stepped forward, her voice trembling. "David, please stop. This isn't helping." Helping, he spun on her, his eyes wild. "You've been nothing but weak, Linda. Weak. If you'd stood up to your father, we wouldn't be in this mess." Her shoulders collapsed, tears spilling down her cheeks as she pulled Emily closer. The little girl buried her face into her mother's side, sobbing softly. That sound, pure, innocent pain cut through me deeper than any of David's words ever could. The bank agent cleared his throat, flipping through his papers. "Sir, regardless of your plans, the property is under our possession now. You'll need to vacate the premises immediately." "I won't," David shouted. Fists clenched, his voice echoing across the street. He looked like a man cornered, stripped of his illusions. Patrick, who had been standing among the neighbors, finally spoke. His calm, steady voice carried authority born of decades in courtrooms. "David, you should walk away while you can. The more you fight, the uglier this gets." David whirled, his eyes narrowing at Patrick. You knew about this, didn't you? You've been helping him behind my back." Patrick didn't flinch. He simply folded his arms and said, "I helped a man defend what was his. That's called justice, David. Something you might want to learn about before you drown in your own arrogance." The crowd erupted with whispers again, some chuckling openly now. David's chest heaved, his pride cracking before our eyes. I stepped forward slowly, my boots crunching on the gravel. "David, you thought you could take what I built with my hands, what Mary and I saved for what this family was supposed to honor. But you never cared about legacy or love. All you saw was a prize to flash around town. And look where it's gotten you." He glared at me, trembling, but there was no fight left, only a hollow rage, the kind that eats a man alive. Linda turned toward me, then her voice barely above a whisper. "Daddy, I'm so sorry." Her tears glistened in the morning light, her shame and regret laid bare for all to see. I gave her a small nod. "It's not too late to choose better, Linda. Not for you, not for Emily." The officer stepped in again. "Mr. Carter, you'll need to leave now. Do you want to do this peacefully, or should we escort you?" For a long moment, David stood frozen. His jaw tightened, his fists clenched and unclenched. Then finally his shoulders sagged. He turned, storming back to the SUV without another word. The slam of the car door rattled through the quiet yard. The crowd began to disperse, conversations buzzing as people shook their heads and muttered about pride, greed, and downfall. Some glanced at me with nods of respect. Others patted my shoulder as they passed, as though I'd fought this battle for them too. Linda remained by the curb, clutching Emily, her tears soaking the child's hair. Patrick walked over and placed a gentle hand on my arm. "You did the right thing, George. Sometimes dignity is the sharpest weapon of all." I looked at the house, my house, now sealed with the bank's notice nailed firmly to the doorframe. It wasn't mine anymore, not in name. But in that moment, I realized I'd already claimed something far more important, the truth. And the truth had stripped David bare in front of everyone who once thought him untouchable. As the SUV peeled away down the street, its tires spitting gravel, I whispered to myself, steady and certain, some illusions were never meant to last. The SUV hadn't gone far. David slammed the brakes just beyond the corner, gravel flying, and then he came storming back down the driveway on foot. His face was a storm of rage and desperation, his voice breaking as he shouted, "You think you've beaten me? You think this is over?" The neighbors froze mid-step, some half-turned to leave others now rooted in place, eager to see what spectacle might unfold next. Linda stood trembling, clutching Emily so tightly that the girl whimpered, her little hands pressed against her mother's blouse. "David, please." Linda begged, her voice cracked raw from crying. "Stop this before you make it worse." But he didn't hear her, or maybe he chose not to. Two officers moved forward, hands on their belts, ready to intervene. David waved his arms wildly, spittle flying as he yelled, "This land is mine. Do you hear me, mine?" He stole it out from under me. The crowd muttered, a few laughs slipping through. One older man near the curb shook his head, muttering loud enough for everyone to hear, "Ain't his land. Never was. Man's drowning in his own lies." Linda suddenly dropped to her knees in the gravel, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Daddy, I'm so sorry," she cried, her voice carrying over the stunned silence. "I let him do this. I let him push me into silence. I should have stood by you. Her confession cracked something open in me, years of doubt, of wondering if she saw me as nothing but a stubborn old man. Hearing her admit her part, watching her face crumple in shame, it was bitter and sweet all at once. Emily, frightened, but brave, wriggled free from her mother's arms and ran straight to me. She wrapped her little arms around my waist, pressing her face into my shirt. Her tears soaked through the fabric as she sobbed, "Don't let them hurt you, Grandpa." My heart nearly broke. I bent down, gathering her close, holding her small frame against me. "I won't, sweetheart. I promise." The officers finally stepped in as David lunged forward again. One grabbed his arm, the other pressed a hand to his shoulder, firm, but measured. "That's enough, sir. You need to calm down before this gets out of hand." David thrashed, shouting curses, his face red veins straining in his neck. "Let me go. He's a liar, a cheat. I'll take him to court. But the words rang hollow. The bank agent raised his voice loud enough to cut through the chaos. "For the record, the deed is final. The property now belongs to the community trust. There's no legal path for Mr. Carter here." The crowd erupted with noise, murmurs, laughter, a few gasps. The weight of the truth rolled over everyone like a wave. David froze in the officer's grip. His mouth opened, then closed again as if he couldn't swallow what he'd just heard. A community trust. His voice cracked broken. I stood tall, Emily still in my arms. "That's right, David. This land isn't yours, and it isn't even mine anymore. It's for the people who will respect it. The library, the seniors at the home, the kids who'll play in its fields. You wanted to use it for pride, but I gave it for dignity." The silence after those words was deafening. Then slowly the murmurs rose again. Approval, respect, even applause from a few scattered hands. David's face twisted. He sagged against the officers, holding him, suddenly looking smaller, shrunken, as though the arrogance had drained right out of his body. The applause stung David more than any insult. His head jerked from side to side, eyes wide, searching for a single sympathetic face in the crowd. But all he found were smirks, pitying looks, and quiet whispers that cut deeper than knives. "Thought he was some big shot," a man in a ball cap muttered. "Now look at him. Poor Linda stuck with that fool," another woman whispered, shaking her head. David snarled, his chest heaving. "You think this is funny?" he roared. "You all laughed at me once before when I was broke, and now you'll laugh again." His voice cracked high and thin, carrying more desperation than authority. One of the officers tightened his grip on David's arm. "That's enough. You need to leave now." But David only struggled harder, jerking against their hold. "I'll sue. I'll burn this whole damn town down if I have to." The words fell flat, met with nothing but derisive laughter from the back of the crowd. Someone clapped, slowly mocking him, and others joined in their chuckles, spreading like wildfire. David's fury melted into panic, his eyes darting, searching for escape. Linda rose shakily to her feet, her face streaked with tears. "David, stop this madness," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "It's over. Can't you see it? You've destroyed enough already." He froze at her words as if struck. For the first time, his bluster faltered. You're turning on me, too." His voice dropped to a hoarse whisper, almost childlike. Linda met his gaze, pain etched in every line of her face. "I should have stood with my father. I should have protected our daughter from this chaos. You dragged us all into your pride and your debts. I won't follow you any further." The crowd quieted, hanging on every word. David swayed where he stood, the officers still gripping his arms, but suddenly he looked utterly hollow. Emily peeked over my shoulder, her small voice trembling. "Mommy doesn't want to go with Daddy." Linda shook her head more, tears falling. "Not anymore, sweetheart. We're staying with Grandpa." The words shattered David. His knees buckled, and if not for the officers, he might have collapsed onto the gravel. His face contorted a mixture of rage, sorrow, and disbelief. No, you can't do this to me," he croaked. But it wasn't me doing it. It was his own hand, his own greed, that had carved this path. The officers exchanged a glance. One spoke firmly, "Mr. Carter, you're disturbing the peace. It's time to go." They began to walk him toward the cruiser, his feet dragging like lead. The crowd parted easily, eyes following, whispers buzzing. Children whispered to their parents' neighbors, traded knowing looks. His name, David Carter, once spoken with a mixture of awe and irritation, was now drenched in ridicule. As they reached the curb, David jerked his head back toward me. His face twisted in one last attempt at defiance. "This isn't over, old man," he spat, though his voice cracked, betraying him. I held Emily, closed my arm around Linda, and answered calmly, "It was over the moment you chose pride over family." The cruiser door slammed shut, muffling his muffled curses. The sound echoed through the quiet neighborhood, final and undeniable. The crowd slowly began to disperse, but the air buzzed with the weight of what had unfolded. I could hear laughter trailing off, some voices shaking their heads in disbelief, others almost gleeful at the spectacle. David Carter, the man who had strutted through Springfield with his nose in the air, was now nothing more than a cautionary tale. Linda leaned against me, her voice low and broken. "Daddy, I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I swear I'll never let him drag me down again." I kissed the top of her head, my voice steady. "We'll find our way forward, together." Emily's small arms tightened around my neck, her tears soaking into my shirt. And for the first time in a long while, I felt not just the sting of betrayal, but the fragile hope of a family piecing itself back together. David Carter had fallen, and with him the illusion he tried to force upon us all. The morning after David was taken away, Springfield felt different. The air had that kind of crisp clarity you only notice after a heavy storm. The sky seemed wider, the streets calmer, as if the whole town had exhaled in relief. For the first time in a long while, I walked down Main Street without feeling the weight of shame pressing down on me. Instead, heads nodded, greetings came easy, and there was even a pat in the back or two from neighbors I hadn't spoken to in months. Word spread fast in small towns. By the time I stepped into the diner that morning, folks already knew about the land transfer, about the library that would rise where David once dreamed of his gaudy mansion. The bell over the door jingled as I entered, and the chatter softened for a moment. Then someone called out, "Good for you, George," and the hum of voices returned. I slid into my usual booth. By the window, the one Mary and I had claimed for years, a waitress young enough to be my granddaughter poured my coffee without asking. "On the house today," she said softly, her eyes kind. I just nodded, not trusting my voice. Patrick arrived not long after, his cane tapping rhythmically against the linoleum floor. He eased himself into the seat across from me, placed his hands on the table, and gave me one of those looks only old friends can manage, the kind that carries both pride and a hint of scolding. "You didn't just save your land, George," he said, his voice low but firm. "You saved your name, and in towns like ours that matters more than money ever could." I sipped my coffee, the bitter warmth steadying me. "I wasn't sure I'd ever get it back," I admitted. "But Mary always said dignity isn't something you're given. It's something you protect even when no one else believes in it." Patrick nodded, slowly tapping the edge of his mug. "She was right, and you honored her." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the kind of quiet that feels earned. Outside, I could see the school bus rumbling down the street, kids waving out the windows. Soon enough, those kids would have a new library shelves lined with books they might not have had otherwise. The thought made my chest tighten with something close to joy. That afternoon, I walked down to the community center where the town council had gathered. They asked me to speak, though public speaking was never something I fancied. Still, I stood before the small crowd, neighbors, friends, even some folks I barely knew, and cleared my throat. I worked that land for 40 years. I began my voice carrying more strength than I expected. And for a while, I thought it would die with me, or worse, become a monument to greed. But it won't. It will become something we can all share, a library, a place where kids can dream bigger than these county lines. And part of it will help keep our elders cared for, because none of us should fear growing old in this town. Applause filled the room, gentle at first, then building. I caught sight of Linda in the back, her face pale but determined. Emily stood beside her, clutching her mother's hand. For the first time in years, I saw a spark of resolve in my daughter's eyes, not the timid shadow David had forced her into. After the meeting, Linda approached me. Her voice trembled, but her words held steel. "Dad, I've decided. I'm leaving him. Emily and I will start fresh. I should have done it sooner, but I'm doing it now." I searched her face, seeing both the fear of the unknown and the relief of finally choosing freedom. I reached out, resting my hand on hers. "It's never too late, Linda. You're stronger than you think, and Emily deserves to see that strength." She nodded, tears slipping silently down her cheeks, and for the first time in a long while I felt the faint stirrings of family returning, not perfect, not whole, but real. That night, I sat on the porch of my old farmhouse, the boards creaking under my weight. The cicadas sang in the dark, the air thick with the smell of cut grass and cooling earth. On the table beside me lay a picture frame, Mary's smile frozen in time, her eyes alive with the kind of quiet wisdom I had leaned on for decades. I picked it up, my thumb brushing against the glass. "We did it, Mary," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. "We kept our dignity. No matter how hard they tried to take it, we held on." The porch light flickered, then steadied. As if even this old house understood. For the first time in months, I leaned back and let the silence feel like peace rather than punishment. A few evenings later, the town held a small gathering on the lot that once carried my barns and fences. The sun dipped low, painting the Ohio sky in streaks of gold and purple. Folding chairs had been set out, and a makeshift podium stood at the edge of the grass. Folks brought pies, casseroles, and even pitchers of lemonade, the way small towns always do when something worth celebrating comes along. I stood off to the side, letting the voices wash over me. There was laughter, the clink of cups, children darting around in the twilight. It struck me then this was exactly what that land was always meant to hold: community, not division. The mayor, a balding man with a deep voice, called me forward. My boots crunched on the gravel as I walked to the podium. I wasn't much for speeches, but the moment called for words. I never thought I'd see this day I began. That patch of earth behind me was my life's work. It raised my children, buried my sweat, and it nearly buried my spirit. But today it stands for something greater. It stands for second chances, for our kids to read, to learn, to hope, and for our elders to know they will never be forgotten. This is not about me, it's about us. Applause rippled across the crowd. Some folks even stood. I caught sight of Emily on her mother's shoulders, clapping with tiny hands, her eyes bright. That picture alone was enough to make every sacrifice worth it. Afterward, people approached me one by one, offering thanks, shaking my hand, some even hugging me. One older woman, her hair silver like mine, whispered, "You reminded us that pride doesn't build towns, dignity does." Patrick leaned on his cane as he made his way to me. He gripped my shoulder firmly. "George, this is the kind of legacy most men only dream of. Don't you forget that." I chuckled softly. "I won't." But truth is, Patrick, I didn't do it alone. Mary was with me every step, and so were you. That night, Linda and Emily came home with me. The house felt warmer with them there, dishes clinking in the sink. Emily's giggles floating down the hall as she explored the rooms. For years, silence had filled those walls. Now there was life again. Linda sat across from me at the kitchen table after Emily went to bed. She looked tired but lighter, as if she'd finally dropped a weight she'd been dragging for years. "Dad," she said softly, "thank you for not giving up on me. I thought I was too far gone, but you waited. And because of that, I found my way back." I reached for her hand. "That's what fathers do, Linda. We stand even when our children stumble, and sometimes standing means letting them fall until they're ready to rise." Tears slipped down her cheeks, but she was smiling. And in that moment, I knew that despite all the damage David had caused, something good had survived. Later, after the house quieted, I carried Mary's picture frame out to the porch again. The night was still, save for the distant hum of crickets. I set the frame beside my chair and let the cool air fill my lungs. "We did it, Mary," I whispered again, but this time there was no ache, only peace. Our family may have been tested, but dignity held us steady. And now it will carry on, not just in our name, but in this town. The wind stirred, rustling the leaves of the old oak by the driveway as if she was answering me. And so I leaned back, content at last. Not because I had won against David, but because I had chosen a path where no one could steal what truly mattered. Justice had been served. But more than that, dignity had been restored. And in the quiet of that Ohio night, I felt the kind of satisfaction that comes once in a lifetime, the satisfaction of knowing I had left behind something worth remembering. Life has a way of testing what we value most. George's story reminds us that dignity cannot be bought or stolen. It is something we choose to protect even when the people closest to us turn away. Family betrayal cuts deeper than any wound, yet it also offers us the chance to show grace without surrendering our principles. We learn that silence is not weakness. Sometimes it is the space where wisdom gathers strength. In the end, justice is not about revenge, but about restoring balance, ensuring that selfishness does not consume what generations worked to build. For those of us in our later years, this story calls us to guard our legacy, not just in land or money, but in honor, kindness, and courage. And for the younger generation, it is a reminder that gratitude is the true inheritance that binds families together. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video. Subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box to the right.